I'm Molly Hughes in the Denver Post newsroom with today's Behind the Headlines. It has been more than a week since the Environmental Protection Agency inadvertently released 3 million gallons of polluted mine wastewater into the Animas River. Still, a lot of unanswered questions about water quality, but one thing is crystal clear right now. This disaster, which occurred at the abandoned Gold King mine on August 5th, has shed light on mining problems that go well beyond the Gold King. It is now clear that there are scores of dormant mines in Colorado that are either leaking contaminated water or at risk of a similar disastrous spill. Denver Post reporter Jesse Paul joins us now from Durango. He's working to move this story down the pipeline, so to speak. He joins us now via Skype. And Jesse, let's just start with a quick overview. What exactly does the situation look like in the mountains there around Durango?
Well, it's kind of apparent that this is a problem that's much bigger than just the Gold King mine where this spill originated. If you travel around the mountains, yesterday we went on a tour, and there's mine portals everywhere that are leaking this kind of orange contaminated fluid that everybody's been talking about that's become so infamous. And even in town in Durango now, as this story has progressed, as the situation has progressed, the water quality has returned to pre-event conditions in the Animas River, but now there's a lot of concerns about this orange sediment that's settled on the bottom, which you can basically just stir up with a stick. So this story is still very much playing out. I think that it's lost some steam maybe in the media and the public eye, but it's very much active for the people here, for the people who really are concerned about what's going on.
And let's talk about them for just a moment now. Some 17,000 well water owners along the Animas there have requested testing on their private wells. They have been so frustrated. Any results yet for those people on the water testing?
We haven't heard back yet on the results of the well testing. Like I said, the only thing that we know is that the Animas River, according to the EPA, has returned to its pre-event conditions, which to begin with weren't already that great. You have to understand that mining has been going on in Silverton in this part of the state since before the turn of the century. So a lot of these mines have been leaking for 140 years or so. So it's returned to what it was before, but there's still concerns about what's going on up in the mountains.
And so are people allowed to drink their well water now? What is going on there? Are they still depending on bottled water?
We haven't heard definitively about the well water, but we know in town that the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment has said that the city of Durango can draw water from the Animas River to provide for the customers here in town. That being said, Durango actually draws its drinking water from another river called the Florida. But it replenishes its reservoirs in the summer from the Animas to kind of help up with watering and irrigation. I don't know definitively if they've begun doing that again, but like I said, the CD, the Department of Health, Public Health and Environment has said that it's okay for them to use that water if they wish.
And let's talk about the recreational water use, which is a huge source of revenue for that part of the state and for business owners down there. At last we heard it was August 17th before people could get back into the water for recreational use. Now that the water is back to pre-event conditions, has that date been changed, or are we still looking at the 17th?
There has been no update on that 17th date. That date was the earliest that officials said that they were going to let people back in the water. We haven't heard if that's going to be changed or not. The thing that's really interesting here is obviously it's summertime. There's a lot of tourists in town. I spoke to a German family that was been in the country for a month, and they were essentially coming here just to raft. And they didn't know what was going on, so they had to find other things to do. But they said, we actually feel bad for the people here. We don't care about our own situation. We were just trying to raft. But yeah, I mean, there's a ton of frustration among the businesses that rely on the river's flow, that want to get back in, want to be making their money. There's been canceled trips. There's been fears that people have been going to other places outside of Durango because, they feel like this place is contaminated, or that there might be some kind of negative effects from being near the water.
And Jesse, let's be clear, the Denver Post has repeatedly asked for the work order under which the EPA was doing its work back on August 5th. Have we gotten that yet?
We haven't gotten a ton of answers on specifically what the crew was doing up in that area it's called the Upper Animas Mining District. We know that they were actually focusing on a different mine, the Red and Bonita mine, the day that the spill happened, and that they just happened to be going up to the Gold King mine to try and test out the water up there. The main focus was this Red and Bonita mine, as a story that we had in the paper today. My colleague Bruce Finley did a great job just kind of explaining that essentially that was a mine that was listed as time critical, as a mine that they really needed to tackle. But yeah, I mean, as far as I know, we have not gotten that work order that we have requested, that my colleague Bruce has requested.
So when we talk about the water being returned to normal water quality pre-event, we're basically relying on what we're being told by the EPA. We have not been actually given any evidence. Is that correct?
They have released some data, some statistics. There is a large table that kind of looks at a day-by-day breakdown of what the actual levels were. They've been doing testing throughout this. A lot of municipalities, a lot of places have been, including the EPA, the federal government as well, had actually tested the water before the mine plume came down. And one interesting thing to note is that, La Plata County here in Durango, in the surroundings of Durango, essentially decided that they were going to test their water on their own too, just to be sure. We've seen that in other places as well. I think that there's just a lot of mistrust of the federal government. Obviously, this has become a huge political issue with politicians from throughout the Southwest basically calling out the EPA for their response.
And experts say, Jesse, that it could be years before we know the full impact, if any, on marine life there. But is there any immediate impact? I did see a photo with a dead fish floating around. Don't know if that's related or not. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to say that we don't know what that fish died of. I think that actually prompted a little bit of worry here in town. There was a story in the Durango Herald this morning talking about how the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, actually in response to that Denver Post picture, had gone through the Animas looking for more dead critters and hadn't found any. We haven't seen any immediate impacts. There's been no massive fish kill die-off, but as officials said, I spoke with Colorado Attorney General Cynthia Coughlin the other day. She said basically, it could be 2 or 3 years before we even know what kind of impacts there would be to certain wildlife. But then again, this has been something that people here have lived with. I spoke to one woman who said years ago, when she first moved to Durango, she caught a fish in the Animas, opened it up, and you could taste and see and smell the metal inside of it. So it's kind of hard to determine whether or not that this is going to be having impact, what the test will be, what the this actual incident will mean in the long term.
And at the top here, we talked about how this whole situation has shed light on all of the different dormant mines and the issues that come with it. We've learned that actually 3 adjacent mines continue to dump 540 gallons per minute. You were up at those sites yesterday. What can you tell us about that? What does it look like?
The best way I could kind of describe it is like a cascading kind of waterfall. One of the mines that we viewed that actually wasn't near the Gold King, not in the area that you're talking about, I found particularly interesting. It's actually in a different basin, different headwater of the Animas that is up in the Mineral Creek area. And this was basically just a pile of rocks with a bunch of water coming through it. And as it was explained to us, that is actually a mine portal that was closed over, and it is water coming from within the mine. And something that I found incredibly interesting about that is that, it looks kind of just like a Rocky Mountain spring, but in reality, the water in that, if you look just a little bit ways down, it's gathering all of this heavy metal sediment. It's got this iron oxide, rust, orange color that's become so infamous. So yeah, I mean, there's those 3 mines that we've reported on that are near the Gold King, but I think it's important to remember that they're everywhere. And what people are saying here, conservationists and people who understand this problem, is that this is kind of a wake-up call, that they're hoping that this one incident will shed light on the problem that's kind of greater in this region, which is, this could happen again, that this is, unfortunately it did happen, this is the first one, but that there's concern about other mines where who knows if you could poke or prod something and another spill could happen.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. You had mentioned that when this happened on August 5th, the EPA actually wasn't even focused on the Gold King mine. They're there for a bunch of other reasons. Why? What were they working on?
So they were working on this mine that was next door to the Gold King called the Red and Bonita mine, and that had been kind of addressed or targeted for concern because of a heavy flow of wastewater that's been coming out of that. There were heavy metals that were tested downstream, and apparently this is kind of contributing to the problems in the Animas River with the aquatic life. Some of the lack of aquatic life that has been in there. But the EPA has been up there for a while now, trying to basically remediate these kind of situations. There's all kinds of political issues, liability issues that surround all of these sites because they're leaking this fluid that raises a lot of concerns, health concerns for both aquatic life outside of the river and for humans.
And Jesse, let's talk a little bit about the Superfund designation. I know you've been working on that. A lot of these mines will not even qualify for that. Is that correct?
Not exactly. It's important to recognize that the Superfund designation is a really touchy subject around here. It's kind of like the S word, if you will. And essentially, if you look at Leadville, which was declared a Superfund site, people look at that situation and kind of say, yes, that worked really well there, but they don't know, people in Silverton are a little bit weary of that. They're a little bit weary of the EPA, especially after this most recent incident that just happened.
All right, Jesse, I know you plan on spending more time down there. What, in terms of the EPA plan and the officials who are working this, what can we expect over the next few days and weeks? Any indication?
We kind of don't know. Again, these testing results, we're hoping that they're going to come back sooner or later. But they haven't said definitively when, especially with the wells. And there have been preliminary results that, again, have said that some areas of the river that have been affected by this are either back at what they were pre-event conditions or returning to that level. But again, we're kind of waiting for more word from the EPA. There's been a lot of criticism for the EPA and the response to this incident, both from local governments and, we've even seen New Mexico and Colorado's congressional delegations in Washington, D.C. kind of sending letters and calling them out. I think what people want here is answers. But one of the big questions in the first days after this is what's in the water. And I don't know if that really has been answered for many people here. And they're kind of still waiting to find out what the deal is. I mean, like I said before, the sediment at the bottom of this river is still a huge concern for people here. That we haven't gotten testing results back on that. But when you pick up a handful of this orange kind of really viscous content, there's questions about what exactly is in that, especially since we know that there were some heavy metals, some dangerous heavy metals that first came through here when the plume made its way down the river.
All right, well, one thing I know, Jesse, is that you and our colleague Bruce Finley will continue to work on getting answers. Thanks so much for joining us from Durango today and giving us that update.
Absolutely.
So Jesse Paul, as I mentioned, set up camp in southwest Colorado. You can see continuing coverage as he and Denver Post environmental reporter Bruce Finley continue to dig their heels in to get to the bottom of all aspects of this story. For now, though, I'm Molly Hughes in the Denver Post newsroom with today's Behind the Headlines.